Hello, good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to our morning webinar on managing company cultures in M&A situations. We have nearly 150 business leaders registered for this event, which we feel highlights really the relevance and interest in the topic. My name is Ia Adlercreutz. I'm the founder and CEO of Co-Founders, and we've been focusing on strategic brand and company culture management for 8 years now. We are really pleased to see that the systematic management of both of these areas has significantly increased in just the past few years. What we do is we help our clients make sure that brand and culture are taken properly into consideration in both strategy work and in everyday practices. Yes, we do actually emphasize the importance of managing brand and company culture as one. We often say that brand and culture are two sides of the same coin. So simply put, the employee experience and customer experience, they should be aligned with each other. But today, we will focus specifically on the challenges that companies face in various M&A situations. And I believe that the most of you attending our event today have either participated or led an M&A process and culture integration work related to it. My first personal experience with M&A integration came in the early 2000s when I played a role in integrating the Swedish company called Hasselfors Garden into the Finnish company Kekkilä, which had acquired. You can imagine that the kind.
I think, yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. So, hello, everyone. I'm Alexandra Monsi. I'm a senior strategist at Co-Founders, and I was in charge of leading this.
Early 70s, necessarily. Oh.
Yeah, we're now overlapping because you were a little bit on.
Oh, okay. So I don't know where I was, where I dropped. I'm so sorry.
You
I have today.
You dropped at your first M&A case.
Okay, yeah,
from there. Then I'll jump in case your connection.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's a shame. Okay, but anyway, so my first own experience was when Hasselfors Garden was acquired by Kekkilä, and it was very interesting as Kekkilä acquired a company founded in the early 17th century. So you can imagine the challenges that the integration was challenging, but it was ultimately successful and a very big learning. Since that M&A case, I've had the pleasure of being involved in several integration projects, and those each, of course, have their unique characteristics. As integrations or these M&A cases are always shaped by their owners, leaders, and employees. Against this background, we can conclude that qualitative research plays a really crucial role in the success of cultural integration work, and in practice, this means listening to people, putting what is heard into context, and of course, reflecting it against the goals that are set for the acquisition. And I think we all also know that how easily mind can play tricks when we are pursuing an acquisition, and the whole idea of our second company culture report that we are about to launch is to help leaders identify and avoid assumptions and behaviors that can really damage a deal. I will soon let Alexandra Monsi, who has been in charge of leading the research for this report, to present herself and the research findings. But before that, I would like to thank, on my behalf, all the 11 leaders who have contributed to this report by sharing their really valuable experiences and insights. And I would also like to introduce our two guests and panelists. So Tuomo Haukkovaara and Satu Teerikangas, who will help us deepen our discussions around the topic of today. So first, Tuomo. Tuomo has a really long career at IBM Finland, where he has served as chairman of the board until this year, as well as general manager and vice president for IBM's long-term services business in the Nordic region. And he has overseen integrations of various M&A deals during the last couple of decades, and has gained extensive experience in the challenges and opportunities presented by the meeting of different cultures. So warmly welcome, Tuomo.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And then Satu Teerikangas, who is professor of management and organization at University of Turku, and also honorary professor at University College London. And Satu's research centers on the management of strategic change. She has explored in the context of mergers and acquisitions, as well as sustainability transformations. She is editor of the Handbook of M&A, which has also served as one of the Bibles of our work at Co-Founders, and equally author of a book called Integraation johtaminen, kulttuuriset voimat yrityskaupassa. All in all, she has authored over 200 publications, including academic articles, special issues, book chapters, and managerial articles, which have been featured on leading international media such as Forbes and Financial Times, among others. So warmly welcome, Satu.
Thank you, Ia and Alexandra. Great to be here. And I'm particularly happy because the topic is super critical. And as you mentioned, I recall when I finished my PhD 2006, it wasn't really discussed about. There wasn't the readiness. So I'm really glad that there is now, and there's this appetite and eagerness. So really grateful that you're organizing this event.
Great. Thanks, Satu. And this is exactly what I referred to. So there is a keen interest on this topic now. So very happy to be able to publish this report. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Alexandra.
Thank you, Ia, and thank you, Tuomo and Satu, for joining us today. I'm very happy to be here. It's always a lot of work behind this kind of report and research, and you're always very thrilled to get it out there. So now the day has finally come. Thank you also to all of the attendees online. I'm seeing over 40 people online with us today. I'm very happy about that, and also hope that during the session, you can gather some questions that you might have, some comments, and write them in the comment box or in the chat box, and then we'll take them at the end of the session. So I'll go through a quick overview of the report to begin with, just to know what to expect from the report, which you will receive fully as a PDF after our session today. And after that, we'll dive into a panel discussion together with Satu and Tuomo, and discuss some of these aspects based on their experience in M&A cases, both from the research perspective as well as the hands-on business perspective. And then at the end, for the last 15 to 10 minutes, we'll take a Q&A session together with you. So we really hope that you have some good questions prepared for us by then. So don't be shy. Right. So like Ia said, we had the opportunity and the pleasure to interview 11 CEOs, senior leaders, and M&A experts who were open to share their experiences and their learnings from different M&A cases that they have overseen, they have participated in, they have learned from throughout their careers. So this is the list of the leaders that we interviewed, and once again, from my side as well, a warm thank you, a big thank you for sharing your expertise with us, to all of the leaders. So to begin with, as we drew from our last year's company culture report, that was more of a general report on the importance of company culture today in the light of all of the crises that we've been facing in the last few years, as well as the constant change that organizations go through and we go through as employees and as leaders throughout our careers. From that report, we noticed that M&A is still considered to be kind of a dark box, a black box area where there are not so many established practices or tools to deal with integration from a cultural perspective. Let's say that at the moment, we do have a lot of tools for the financial and operational integration of an M&A, but not so much on the culture side. So what we tried to do is to collect what else should we address from the culture perspective beyond the financial synergies and beyond the operational efficiencies, and how can we blend and harmonize different organizational culture to different extents, because not one merger or one acquisition is the same. So there's no one size fits all, but they do have still some commonality and some aspects to consider. So mostly throughout this report, it's actually built so that it serves as a checklist, right? For things that you as the leader can go through and see and almost like check the box if this is something that you have considered, if this is something that would work in your organization, if it is a tool or a method that you might find really handy. So that's just to begin with. It's more of a playbook than anything else. We also collected around 5 case studies that are briefly described in terms of their different situation of that merger or that acquisition, the strategy around it, and the integration approach. All of these case studies are kept anonymous. They're from different experiences of different leaders, but we have kept the names of the companies anonymous, as well as the connection to the interviewees, just for confidentiality purposes. So we think that anyway, it's the learnings from the cases that are the most valuable. And same goes for the tools and methods for smooth integration. We picked the best and most relevant tools that can help you hands-on when you are going through this kind of a deal. And then to end with, we focused on leadership practices because leaders have a key role in M&A integration overall. So to begin with the case studies, we use these examples to illustrate the fact that there are different approaches and different integration efforts with different outcomes. So they go from large-scale mergers of equals, so to say, from that to smaller cases of acquisitions where companies are smaller, or the purchase companies are smaller and they have their own unique cultural identities. These case studies also go from full cultural integration, where one company, let's say, absorbs or aims to fully absorb the acquired company into the same culture with the same kind of operations, same values, etc., to, let's say, a much more autonomous way of integration, so to say. So we use this term integration with the note that the extent of the integration and the extent of the merging of the cultures varies greatly from case to case. So we pulled here 3 of the 5 cases that are in the report that are hopefully different enough for you to get just a glimpse of it here in the session today, and you can read more about it in the report. Okay, so looking at the case study 1, it's a case of a large-scale merger of equals. After the merger, the company had over 65,000 employees. It was also a merger that dealt with 2 very big companies in 2 different countries, which also brought aspects like national culture differences and cultural aspects to be considered from that point of view. But overall, the integration approach was to merge the 2 cultures, to find a one common culture based on the strengths of each of them. And this started already from the due diligence phase, where the leadership of both of the companies looked into different cultural aspects. However, those were not as strongly emphasized as the financial side and operational side. And perhaps it's worth mentioning that in this case, the business was a complementary business, right? So basically, they completed each other's offering, but also in some areas overlapped what they were offering to the market. After the merger, so the post-merger integration, they have set up a cultural stream to shape up the so-called desired company culture, to identify the heritage in both of the companies, and also set a target state or a desired state for the new organization that would emerge. A great task, considering the size of the company, the new company. They also used illustrative tools as visual metaphors to represent the different cultures of these 2 companies, to better understand how each of them lives and breathes, right? And they also used quite a lot of external support and consulting for this work. The challenges were mostly internal politics and external pressures from the market, right? So internally, because it's a merger, or it was a merger of equals, there was a sensitivity to how much you can push in one direction or another. And then you have to really agree on everything together. So this also led to the fact that they weren't making radical adjustments early enough that would have been needed from the point of view of the external market pressure. So when you have a very competitive landscape and slower motion inside of the company, where you're not making changes fast enough, then you can lose some of that momentum on the marketplace. So these were the main challenges, and naturally, in a company of that size, is no wonder. The outcome overall, it was a sort of mixed success, in the sense that there was a very good integration at the top leadership level, but that didn't really trickle down through all of the functions and departments and locations of the organization. So then there were varied degrees of integration throughout the company. The other case is a cross-borders, cross-national acquisition with cultural sensitivity. meaning that the parent company was in one country and the company that was acquired was in another country, and the approach was mainly really carefully looking into the cultural sensitivity aspect, especially the national culture, because the two national cultures were very different. So the acquiring company recognized the importance of both understanding and respecting these national cultural differences, and they made efforts to use cultural training and awareness into the integration process and try to really understand, okay, how do we do things around here compared to you, and what can we learn from you, what you can learn from us, so that some of those aspects, we know that they're not going anywhere, because we are determined to a large extent by the cultures that we're living and breathing in. But at the same time, we can try to find a common ground and try to really understand where the other one is coming from, if we really understand the cultural background of that country. There were challenges on the way, as probably no surprise. So mostly in aligning work practices and employee expectations. So those two areas were where national cultural differences showed up the most. And then as an outcome, after the first year, they did reach an enhanced understanding of the other culture, and they used targeted cultural training, ongoing dialogue, and they navigated this cultural different cultural landscape towards a more cohesive and inclusive work environment. The next case study focuses on smaller to mid-sized acquisitions with autonomous operations. So in this case, the parent company has a very entrepreneurial policy when it comes to the acquired companies. They want to give almost full autonomy to those companies. In some places, they still keep the brands and the company names operating locally as they had before, while ensuring that there is some connection to the parent company, and that goes more or less for the value base, so to say. So the way to manage this kind of a very free, autonomous type of integration is through finding somebody in a leadership role that can serve as a bridge between the parent company and the acquired company. So there you have to rely a lot on that person who ensures the vital part of the integration that is still needed for things to go in the same direction, right, from a business strategy point of view. The challenges were that, of course, throughout all of these smaller acquisitions, there are a lot of variations in practices in terms of branding, IT systems, and culture overall, ways of working. So this requires a different kind of management to ensure some level of coherence while giving that freedom to all of these different business units around the world. So overall, in many of these cases, with very few exceptions, there has been a successful integration in the sense that there is a good connection between the parent company and the local business, and all of these business units can use their strengths in the best way to compete on the local market, and they also know the local market the best compared to the parent company. So that's the whole idea there. And in some cases, then if the company culture is completely different than the parent company culture, then there are some discussions at leadership level, and that's how they deal with these cases where, let's say, the value base is not aligned. So open dialogue and a key role of the integration manager or the integration leader. Okay, we dive into the tools and methods that are used by leaders to ensure a successful integration. And when we have the panel discussion, we can go back to some of these cases that were presented together with Satu and Tuomo and discuss those further. Many of the leaders that we interviewed also mentioned that there's a need for a culture assessment toolbox of some kind that we as leaders should have at our disposal, and we would systematically use in M&A cases. Again, considering the fact that M&As come in different shapes and sizes. So these tools and methods help to assess, manage, and integrate cultures during M&As. And this then leads to a smoother transition, a faster transition, a better alignment between the two cultures in a way that it also serves the overall business strategy, right? Because everything is at the end related to ensuring a successful business. So we'll go through these tools and methods one by one. I will open them up a little bit here. Of course, more information is in the
Tämä toimi pätkissä ja mun oma puhe ja kaikki katkesi 1000 kertaa. Ihan niin kuin...
Yeah, has the microphone on. Okay, good. So first of all, the cultural due diligence. This is something that perhaps in the past has been kind of skipped by businesses. Now there's more and more focus and attention towards due diligence for cultural aspects. And there are many leaders that already have a toolbox in place and ways to assess the cultures before they make a deal. Also, sometimes this process makes or breaks the deal, so to say. Of course, there's still a lot of unknown in this phase, and we can open this up later on during our panel discussion, because there's only so much you can access before acquiring a company. But nevertheless, there are some aspects that you can understand by having open dialogue with the leaders and really understanding what is sometimes in between the lines, reading in between the lines, and seeing how the practices and the value base is similar or not. Another tool is, of course, surveys, using surveys and pulse checks to really take the temperature of how are people doing, especially after a deal happens. So let's say you start with these checks early on in the integration phase, and then systematically you recheck the sentiment of people as the integration proceeds. So that's important because it gives you a clear understanding of are we going in the right direction? Are people excited about this change, or are they afraid of it still? Are they, how many are detractors and how many are supporters for this new entity, new company? Also, direct interactions and observations, dialogue between leaders at different levels of the organization and employees at different levels of the organization. So here it's very important to emphasize the need for meeting face-to-face and having these moments of serendipity, so to say, and moments where people can really get to know each other over even informal lunches or coffee breaks, and maybe more organized meetings where they can ask questions and open up their own uncertainties, their fears, and discuss things openly. A lot of M&As also happened during the pandemic or right before the pandemic. So in those business cases, there was definitely a lag of integration, despite the efforts made online and working remotely, because nothing can really replace that face-to-face interaction. So it's important to emphasize that. Then workshops and training sessions, also working with the common values. Sometimes companies reopen their values and rework them together with the purchase company, or it is more of an effort to understand the common value base and to translate it into the new environments as well. And training sessions, especially coaching for leaders, for example, who are in key roles for these transitions. And we'll dive into that in the next session as well. Then there are also recognition and reward systems that companies use when tracking the success of the integration, even from a culture perspective, not only from an operational or financial perspective. So there could be culture-related KPIs that are followed through, and the people who are ambassadors of this change, of this culture transition, they can also be recognized for the key role that they're playing. Having access to different communications channels. So again, going back to the importance of interaction, it's also important for people to have clear channels where they can voice their concerns, their opinions, and where, let's say, this negotiation space happens. And the more varied these channels are, the better. However, it's also important to think strategically what communication channels we use in a way that it's easy for everyone. It's also a place where we can sort of understand the discussion and also lead it in a systematic way. Cultural mentorship and pairing. So this is something that in many of these M&A cases is used, in the sense that beyond the top leadership level, where this integration is planned and discussed, people are paired at different levels of the organization with their counterpart, let's say, in the other company. So that fosters then this dialogue and understanding the other culture better, really bringing a human level to it, but also understanding from a professional perspective, how do they do their job? What can we learn from them? What can they learn from us? And also translating a little bit of this unspoken layer of the culture to the other person and understanding it ourselves. Leadership best practices. I'm just gonna check the time. So I'm going to wrap up soon, being aware that we would like to also have enough time to discuss with you and for the panel discussion. So this is the last part of the report. It focuses on leadership best practices because, of course, leaders play a very big role in the cultural integration process, and it is to leaders that we look for direction. We look for understanding why an M&A happened. What will it mean for me in my role? Do I need to be concerned? Will I have new responsibilities? How will I work with my new colleagues, etc.? All of these questions that any employee will have in this case. And actually, this reminds me of something that we've talked extensively with Tuomo before, and we will dive into it during our panel discussion. When a merger happens or when an acquisition happens, we as employees we haven't applied for a job within that company. So it's a whole new setting, and we lose a little bit of this control of our careers. So in this context, leaders really have an important job to transition, to help us transition. So first of all, one of the key aspects of leadership in this context of M&As is setting the tone of the culture. That becomes even more important in this context than in the everyday. So as we know, sometimes it suffices to have one very dominant person. This is actually something that we also discussed in an interview with a leader. Sometimes you can have a very dominant person that sets the tone of the culture overall in a business unit, for example. So it's important to be aware of it in a positive and negative way as well. So it can go either way. The other side, going hand in hand with this, with the fact that leaders set the tone for the culture, they also serve as role models, right? We look to our leaders to be inspired, to understand why we're doing what we're doing, to understand the strategy behind the business, and to also emulate some of that behavior, right? So it's important that leaders are aware of what role model they are putting out there, and at the same time they work with themselves to be able to facilitate it or manage it. Then understanding cultural differences. So of course there is this expectation that leaders put enough effort into understanding these differences to be able to manage them. That they have the right communication skills, the empathy, the emotional intelligence to be able to deal with sometimes difficult situations. They are able to drive people through the change. So they have skills in change management as well, and conflict resolution. So conflict is also something that opens up an avenue to change. And again, if managed well, then that change can be positive, even if it starts with a conflict. Then also leaders need to have access to toolboxes for cultural integration. They can organize workshops and interactive sessions in different teams, and also then spar at top leadership level with other leaders on the progress of things. Also, continuous learning is an important aspect of this work, because sometimes we don't know how these cases will actually roll in practice. So it's important to learn, and then to learn fast, fail fast and learn fast, and then get back on track. It's also important that leaders have enough support from the organization. So mentorship and coaching for them is needed as well, for them to be able to mentor and coach their teams. That they are aligned with the values and are able to translate those values in the everyday work in practical terms, and also they are able to recognize the people in their team that are behaving according to the values of the company, and also celebrate that, and overall build trust and engagement throughout the organization. So more on all of these aspects and key points in the report. And as a conclusion, so as we know, cultural integration is not a project, but it is an ongoing effort. It does require empathy, it does require strategic thinking, and it is sometimes taking a longer time than expected, but it's important to be able to have the tools to assess it in a timely manner, and also the expertise to be able to intervene when things get tough, so to say, or things get challenging. So without further ado, I would like to invite Satu and Tuomo for our panel discussion. So really happy that we could have you with us today. So let me start with the kind of pre-question of all of this report is why M&As happen in the first place, and why so many companies go through M&As, even though the odds are not the best. There's a lot of numbers around how many M&As are failing and why, and yet so many companies go through these transitions. Why are M&As needed? Tuomo, maybe you can start from a business perspective. Then I'm really curious about Satu's perspective from a research point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. So basically, there's two types of growth for business: organic and inorganic, and sometimes it's considered, or often it's considered that organic growth, for example, going internationalization and going global, is too slow. Sometimes products are too slow to develop yourself. You can see from big giant companies that they buy additional know-how and products into their portfolio because it's faster than just building yourself. So basically, it's seen as fast path for growth, but like you said, that there are risks that in the end of the day it doesn't work. But if it works, certainly you get geographical coverage almost immediately when you buy a company that is operating in a different geographical area. So that's often from when you look from financial and business point of view, it's basically attractive compared to that you build gradually yourself everything, all this organically. So that's the basics of why we do it.
Yeah, and the numbers look a lot better, and also it tends to look better on paper than in practice in many of these cases. And maybe what really jumps in is the cultural part. Satu, what can you tell us from your perspective about why M&As happen from all of your research with different organizations?
Perhaps putting that into perspectives, not just my research, but actually the international research community over the last 50 years, or perhaps 40 years more specifically. I think we need to put this into the perspective of what kind of a paradigm we're working with, and the kind of paradigm we are set amid, or that companies are set with, is a paradigm of continuous economic growth and globalization. And if you're in such a paradigm, then in a sense, quite often you actually don't have, it's kind of, you're in a system that doesn't give you the choice. That leads to the next question then, that it doesn't mean that it's always the best option for a company. As Tuomo said, you can grow organically, or you can grow by M&As, other kinds of partnerships as well. And I think that's where we start to get to the problem as to why M&As fail, is that there might be a bit of this speed blindness, or kind of this, so I think of doing too many M&As and actually not thinking carefully. So the key point being for decision makers, do you actually need this acquisition? Do you need this merger? And how does it connect to your strategy now and in the future? And if this question would be answered very well, I think many of the problems subsequently that we see in integration would not occur. So I just leave it there.
Thank you. I think that puts things into perspective, and it's good to understand the why before diving into why things might not be working and how could they be working better. So I'm going back to this idea that you, Tuomo, mentioned many times, that you never applied for that job at that company in the first place. So can we talk a little bit about the uncertainty and this loss of control over their own careers that people feel, and also bring into discussion maybe something that behaves like an acquisition, but it's actually outsourcing, but people have like a very, very similar feeling in those cases as well, and there's the need for an integration case in those cases as well.
Yes, there was also a question from Minna Isotalus about kind of what strategies are aligning leadership teams post and pre-merger. And the pre-merger is pretty tricky because typically these are under strict NDAs, and in listed company, everybody who is involved it needs to be an insider listed, and it's natural that the teams are kept pretty narrow and they can't openly communicate anything. So the pre-merger kind of due diligence, certainly that is done, but it can't be done very broadly typically. And in the normal kind of employee level, often this type of decisions comes as a surprise, and then it's kind of cultural shock that basically you have built your career and you have devoted yourself to your company, and it's part of your professional, or big part of your professional being, and then suddenly you are told that, well, this is you have been gone, and there are lots of uncertainties also involved, so that you don't know always that okay, there will be layoffs and job changes, and it will be different company, and you may think about the acquirer that was not very kind of you didn't look up to that company or something like that. So basically there are lots of uncertainties, and especially this loss of control, that suddenly overnight somebody tells that I've been moved, or like I've heard many times to say that I've been sold. So that basically people are in one case the exact words were that we were sold like sausages. So that basically feel like that my value is kind of measured in euros, and now I was sold to something else. And it's also there when you outsource. It's basically business transfer. When you outsource a big portion or one function, it's pretty similar. The only even trickier situation is that basically some of your colleagues may stay and you are leaving, so that why me? Why not them? And that's additional kind of complexity in that. Similarly, that if you continue to serve your ex-company as an external party, like in many outsourcing cases, that's the case. So it's also that then it's a tricky that suddenly your colleagues becomes your clients, and real money moves back and forth and so forth. So it's a personal thing, and it's something that you can always prepare, but you can't so much pre-communicate and do things upfront due to these, for example, stock exchange rules, that you are not allowed to communicate these.
Yeah, absolutely.
I might perhaps continue from Tuomo's point in the sense to answer your question, Alexandra, in the sense that I think for the audience, what's important to recognize is that acquisitions and mergers are kind of one type of inter-organizational kind of encounter. So you can see similarities with joint ventures, partnerships, divestments, outsourcing agreements. But the question here is that with acquisitions and mergers, there's a change of ownership for the entire company, and that's huge. Versus then the divestment is the reverse of an acquisition. And I think for the audience, what is helpful to recognize is that we know at the moment that all kinds of transformations and change management within an organization is really challenging. And now we're saying that actually, hang on, with an acquisition and merger, you're adding the fact that you're changing kind of ownership for the acquired company. And that's huge. But my kind of on a positive note, I would encourage the audience to think about what are in their own kind of practice as executives and consultants to think about like Tuomo is doing, the similarities and differences about these different types of inter-organizational arrangements, because in a sense there are some similarities, some differences, but in that sense, your leadership practice also deepens.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point to touch upon. Yeah.
I think Satu, it's really good that you bring up also the divesting part of this, because what I'm sort of personally promoting is that even if you are divesting a part of your business or a company, it actually serves the deal a lot in case you do prior to divesting, you do this kind of culture work, because you do a great service to the purchaser, and also you practically add value to the. I mean, you could even argue that you can ask for a better price due to the fact that you've done a proper culture work before divesting the company, and you have insights that you can share, and you can sort of help the buyer mitigate the risks. So I think it is very crucial to also think of this side of it. Thank you, Satu, for bringing that up.
Yeah, there's so many different models where this applies, not only the mergers or acquisitions themselves, and I think these are great points to bring up, and it also leads us to this continuous transformations that we're seeing in businesses, or these changes that are never ending, where it feels like they're never ending. And from this point of view, and from the point of view of the fact that it is hard for people to deal with change constantly, what is your view on business transformation related to this context of M&As, and what can leaders do better to support people through these transformation processes?
I might perhaps start this time and actually kind of take it one step backwards, in the sense that over the last years, I think we've all seen in businesses and also across the public sector that we are kind of, not just as regards transformations, but all kinds of changes, incremental, kind of major radical changes. There's a lot of change taking place in addition within organizational change, sometimes in partnerships. And now we add on acquisitions and mergers, and some companies do a lot of them for a good reason. Some companies do a lot of them for having not thought it through. So what you're hearing from what I just said is that there's a lot going on in terms of transformation and change. Now, what we know in terms of psychology is that a person's mind can only take so much. And we also say the same for organizations, that we talk about absorptive capacity for organizations. And I think we could say the same for individuals. So I would actually challenge us in our current way in which we lead our organizations, and is that, in a sense, do we engage into transformations and all kinds of changes and acquisitions too easily, not recognizing how much is going on and how much they end up burdening people who are working in the organization? Because in a sense, we aren't robots whose kind of brain capacity can be increased or bodily capacity can be increased. We have limited bodily and cognitive capacity. And actually what we're seeing at the moment in the workplace is that this capacity is being breached. And that's why it brings me back to the point of leaders' decision-making, that in a sense, be very clear as to what you're doing, what's your strategy, why you are acquiring right now. Serial acquirers like Kone, for example, are brilliant examples of companies that acquire on an ongoing basis, but with a very clear strategy. And they've been very clear about that for a very long time. That's okay. But then if you're an organization that just humbles along and does so much, then actually no surprise that your performance lags. So to sum up, a key point for decision makers, be very clear to prioritize what kind of changes and transformations you get into. And at the moment, the key message that is coming from from practitioners across all levels of organizations is there's just too much going on. And if there's too much of change going on, people can't focus on their daily work. And if you can't focus on your daily work, there is no performance and there's no creativity.
Correct. Yeah, very well said, Satu.
If I can add, so that basically, like Satu alluded, that today transformation is becoming kind of fundamental business capability, so that there are so many external forces that force us to transform one way or another, and then these like mergers and acquisitions are kind of initiated by the company itself in addition. And basically the financials and business alignment, even if it requires hard work and good due diligence, I think it's let's say the easy part, in the sense that we are used to do it, and we can make sense that, okay, the financials match, and the geographical coverage or product coverage or whatever we are looking is again making sense. But then I think that in this tsunami of transformations, we need to focus on listening and caring of the people involved, and then find early wins, so that the kind of to a little bit ease up the uncertainty that, okay, something may change better in a short while, and emphasize those, and also use the early adapters, identify that, okay, there are always people that are eager to jump on, and you can build on them. And finally, like I think Satu said well, also that communicate, that why we are doing this, how we are doing this, how you get involved, and basically leave less room for or vacuum for speculations and rumors and all kinds of kind of things that easily spread in this type of situation. So that basically, if you are there and listen and also communicate, then there's at least a better chance that you catch up all these, let's say, fake news and other stuff that may harm your transformation.
Thank you. So I think it's again, like what we've come to see and also learned on the way is that what you're talking about is practically the company culture iceberg. I don't know how many of us are familiar with the idea of the things that are above the surface, which are the processes, different kind of like location things, the very sort of simple things that lead often our sort of decision on whether we'll acquire a company. They are maybe managed, but then everything that is beyond, like underneath the surface, the disciplines and personal fears and core values and work ethic and whatnot, those are maybe not considered, and they should be real. I mean, the way to explore them is really about listening, as you said, like listening people and people feeling they are heard. And that's why I think it would be interesting to hear your opinion on qualitative research versus then more numeric analysis when leading this kind of a process. So it would be really interesting to understand, as it is very work heavy. I mean, when we do qualitative research, it's work heavy, meaning it is expensive, but just to understand the upsides of this kind of approach, it would be really interesting to hear you reflect on this.
Well, I would say that there was also a question from the audience from the measurement, that certainly there are in this kind of success on cultural integration, there are hard measurements like retention rate, and you can run several pulses and get kind of indexes on how people are feeling and how this is progressing. But it's often the things that you miss in this type of things are basically only catched up by qualitative discussions and panels and informal lunches and even doing some kind of qualitative search on this, and there that's certainly it's laborious and it takes time, and especially if leaders are going to the front line and doing it, it's away from the other tasks, but still I personally think that it pays off.
Thank you.
I'm happy you touched upon that, Tuomo, because I was also going to suggest that we pick up some questions from the audience as we move along. So I'm really happy to see so many questions here. And I think the one you referred to was from Minna-Liisa Nurmilaakso. It was mentioned culture KPIs for managers, leaders when toolbox or rewards were discussed. Do you have examples for those? So it depends on the company, and some of them Tuomo already mentioned, but ultimately what leaders refer to when thinking about these KPIs are really, are we able to work together on specific business projects that are successful? So you then actually, you don't have a KPI that relates to cultural alignment in a vague way, but do you have KPIs for successful collaboration that leads to business results? So those count as culture KPIs, so to say, because they are proof points of we are aligned enough in our ways of working and our ways of collaborating that we were successful in closing in this new business case that wouldn't have happened if we would have been two separate entities.
Perhaps building on that, I think the questions on the chat and Q&A are just great. So building on these tools and so on, I think something that's important to recognize is that quite often, and I think even today, for the purposes of just focusing, we are kind of the seminar is titled Cultural Integration, and that's what we do as researchers as well. So we kind of focus on that, and we just need to somehow scope it. But when we're in the practice, and I'm particularly thinking of the decision makers, board members, top management team members, investors, let's recognize that culture is not something that's kind of this is culture, and then there's a merger, and we kind of somehow manage this culture so that they become integrated, hopefully somehow. And this is kind of some little thing that we kind of measure. I think what is really important to recognize is that culture is everything. So that organization, whatever company it is, it's everything is culture. And that's why we can't just say, kind of, we manage culture. It's actually everything we do throughout the pre and post acquisition or merger stages. Everything has an effect on cultural integration. And what is fascinating, what we found in our research is that the main problem companies have is that you all know that many organizations have values, most of them, and only in some of those corporate values are actually aligned with the company itself. So those companies where the organizational values, let's say 3 to 4 to 5, are actually aligned with what is actually taking place in the organization, those are the organizations where when they acquire, they are likely to, everything that they do in integration is actually cultural integration. I would imagine, Tuomo, that IBM, having a track record of a long-standing organization that's done acquisitions as a serial acquirer, as a best practice example, is kind of implicitly such an example. But then kind of what we see as researchers, in a number of cases, the bulk of organizations out there have values, but the reality is something different. So there's a real danger then is that all of these cultural trainings are geared toward the formal values, whereas then in reality, people see something totally different, such as bullying, being named a sausage shop or whatever. And so in reality, what we know in cultural integration is we gear toward what we see in reality unconsciously through those implicit messages. So again, a key message for now HRM, human resource directors and strategic leaders, if you want to be serious about cultural integration, then take culture seriously in the organization, because those organizations that do, then they're actually, cultural integration is part of everything, of the entire integration work, actually.
Thank you, Satu. I think it's super, super good that you brought this up. And also there is a lot of evidence of actually motivation, people's motivation eroding a lot in case the values or the brand messaging is not in line with how the actual organization is actually behaving and functioning. So I think this is one of the key learnings of all of the work that we've at least done.
But then it just becomes much more difficult, because I think a lot of the listeners on the line will recognize that most of the multinationals out there at the moment, the leading ones, they've grown, the acquired ones and the buying ones, they've grown through acquisitions. So their organizational cultures are likely to be amalgams of different cultures. As a result of which, then it's very easy for us to see or to say, why don't you have a global organizational culture? In reality, it's a messy, it's an ambiguous, it's a multi-year kind of challenge to actually integrate. If you think of all the leading, for example, Finnish multinational firms, they've all grown through acquisitions. So how do you make sure that there's a Wärtsilä or there's a Kone that is actually kind of globally integrated culturally as well? So kind of over time, if you grow through acquisitions. So there's one thing to talk about an entrepreneurial company's culture, where the leader's role is super important, or a startup. And there's another thing to talk about these larger multinationals that have grown through acquisitions. And research shows that quite often those are the ones that have trickiness, because there's so many, sometimes even competing cultures that can then kind of these competing cultures can result in all kinds of political and emotional reactions taking place.
Yes, exactly. And on the other hand, I think it's also fair to say that sometimes it really pays off to allow, competing cultures exist. And also, I don't think it is necessarily only only big enterprises, big companies that might encounter this challenge. I think it might even be, 3 smaller companies trying to somehow create a common culture. So I think it's very true to also consider subcultures as sometimes being strategically the right choice for a company.
Yeah, I remember this one example from a leader that was quite illustrative of this, because they wanted to create this very innovative department, and they moved them to another building, just so that they foster that spirit, that innovation, really creatively and openly, and they're not so much influenced by the rest of the organization that was quite traditional, so to say, and maybe they found barriers at every corner. So they on purpose separated them to be able to later integrate them in a smoother way. So there are all kinds of solutions for these situations.
If I can add one thing on this kind of company culture, and especially Nina has asked about how much companies look at the values. My experience from especially IBM is that basically we look very much beforehand the values that it aligns, because basically we believe that that drives the whole culture. That's the cornerstone for the culture that it's built on, and that's why if there's a mismatch between the values, then the whole deal may be called off. So that basically there's a smaller chance for success, and also. There's another question following that. What is the hardest one, kind of the cultural point of view? I would say that the brands that if there's a very strong brand recognition and brand alignment, so people are truly company persons and they feel associated to the brand, then it's very hard to move to something else. And then maybe you should even consider to retain a different culture and don't even kind of try to full integration of it if it's very, very strong brand alignment and kind of that will stay there whatever you do. So that's one thing. Whether it's the other aspects are in my view case dependent, but that's something that needs to be looked very carefully. And there are examples like in consumer brands that when they acquire companies, they pretty much keep the entity a little bit arm's length, so that it may stay and keep their own subculture and then integrate on a financial and business level more. But that's something that I would like to add here.
And perhaps just kind of building on that in a sense, and there's a few questions that relate to that in a sense, though we're talking about cultural integration today, it doesn't always take place. Like Tuomo said, that in a sense, it really depends on the integration strategy that the acquirer has set for that particular acquisition. Or in the case of a merger, how companies are going about it. So in a merger, it's very likely because you're merging the organizations, but in acquisition, it depends on the integration strategy. And there's different integration strategies. It can be a merging strategy, it can be a takeover strategy, it can be an autonomy strategy. And I think so if you are aiming to keep, for example, you purchase an entrepreneurial company, a technology startup, and you want to keep it autonomous, I think there was a question on the chat on that, then in a sense, please don't culturally integrate them because they'd hate that. So be very careful as to why you're acquiring, and then once you're acquiring, what is the integration strategy? And the integration strategy for the acquisition also relates to the company's more broad kind of global integration strategy, that multinationals have different global integration strategies. So some multinationals in the past were very kind of decentralized some decades ago, and increasingly they're becoming globally integrated. So let's be careful that in a sense, explicit cultural integration takes place only when you want to also integrate the company.
Yeah, very, very good point. And thank you, Satu, for clarifying that. And actually, I want to link this to one of the tools that leaders refer to in our research, is to have this so-called integration mapping, right? That serves your business. So if you're able to, when you have gathered a little bit of experience, let's say you have acquired one company or two companies, you can then create this integration mapping document that would then allow you in future cases to make the right decision, right? It's like a decision tree mapping, that if you purchase, for example, a complementary business area, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to merge it with your existing business and culture, or do you want to keep it separate? Exactly what you said. So that kind of a document as a tool, then it serves you to make those crucial decisions on the spot without needing to go back and forth and maybe risking that you are taking the wrong decision to begin with.
I think that's a good point, Alex. And just adding to that, I think it's also very good for a company to have one or two tools that are consistent throughout. So actually, different parts of the company learn to understand the sort of the essence of those tools, because they also help to unite thinking. If you have these couple of tools that really help you consistently do these decisions. And I think Matthias asked there, like, what is your thinking on when to integrate the culture and the degree of integration? For instance, if the plan is to keep the acquired entirely relatively independent, is there a need for culture integration? If the plan is to integrate the target into acquired integrated group structure, then there can only be one culture, one set of values. And I think this is a very typical question, because we are before the unknown when we start even in the pre-screening phase. And again, I think, and I'm happy to hear Tuomo and Satu add to this, but I think it's also a lot about self-awareness and willingness to try to deeply understand. There are no right answers. We are only about to learn what is the right decision from the bigger group strategy point of view. And I think it's relevant to understand that we need to create self-awareness. We are often not very self-aware. We might see acquisitions where the CEO is super excited about the whole thing, and the rest of the management team, even the owners, might be a bit lost, like, why is there an urge to do this acquisition even? And that's a red flag practically. So we need to gain as the whole sort of owner, top management, even employee axis, the understanding of why is this taking place, just as Satu just earlier said, why is this acquisition taking place? But back to Satu and Tuomo, I'm really keen on hearing your thoughts on this Matthias question.
I think very much aligned with you. I think I kind of in different words answered it in my previous answer. So I'll go on to another question, which is what are the hardest cultures to integrate? And that's a really good question, because in a sense, what experienced acquirers say, they kind of say that every time, even despite you have experience, every time is different because the cultural match is different. So we have to recognize that there's national cultures that impact an organization, but then sometimes you might be acquiring an R&D unit to join it to your R&D organization. And they have within your culture, organizational culture, that R&D culture might be very different from the rest of the organization. So be very careful at what you're talking about. But in kind of one very one clear-cut signal that does come from research over the time is that when you're purchasing first-time companies that are being purchased for the first time, typically entrepreneurial companies, technology startups, the first-time experience of being purchased is the most trickiest one. And then once you've been purchased a few times, it gets easier. But I'd say then there's also those who've been purchased a few times and they end up being burnt out and sick and tired of being continuously purchased. So it's not so let's be very careful. But this idea of the super entrepreneurial versus the super formal is perhaps one way of making a categorization. And having said that, let's be super careful, because ultimately there's no real perfect categorizations that match, though they're all kind of stereotypical. So we use them, but then we also need to use our own kind of gut sense, like the other panelists have been saying, and our experience.
Yeah, and one point here is also the fact that, and again, I'm echoing many of the leaders' voices here, no integration goes exactly according to plan. So you will have a lot of surprises on the way, and there's only so much that you can pre-plan. And I think a lot of this work is being able to really listen throughout this whole process to the organization, to the way it's adapting, and be able to take those decisions that would serve the best. There's no point to force a plan if you see that there's too much resistance to it and it will end up crashing. So then that part is something that you have to then rely on the leader's emotional intelligence and agility to be able to resolve in due time.
Thank you for picking up that, Alex. And I think that that has to do with the fact that we talk about the day one, the 100 first days, and then we really, shake up a discussion by saying, yes, what we talk about is the 1,000 days plan after integration, or post integration. So I think it's really important to understand that attitudes and these things that these intangibles that you find under the surface, they are not something that change from one day to another, but it takes a long time, and we have to allow the organization to really transform.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to pick up one question that I find very interesting from Tiina here. I think we haven't replied to that one. What would be the key considerations from cultural perspective in a case where there's a carve out of a part of a business which is likely to be eventually sold, but there's a long period of uncertainty, not knowing the potential buyer? So then people float in this area of uncertainty, and there's a lot of fears, and then you might risk losing some of your best people because they don't want to deal with that and they just want to work in a more solid environment. What is your take?
It's an absolutely brilliant question, and it's very important to also take the seller's perspective, because actually an active seller is also actually part of the success story. And that's an absolutely brilliant question, because what we know from research is that in those cases where the acquired firm or the acquired unit's management team is super motivated about the deal and about the future, they might actually start to drive the integration, and the buying firm can actually stand out. And that's been my experience with Finnish companies when they acquire, that the strength that we as Finns have is that we have a bit of this laissez-faire or kind of delegative integration approach compared to the Americans, for example, or the English. And in a sense, there's weaknesses with that, but I think the strength is that when there's a motivated acquired firm, we actually build on that motivation. And that is super important, because intrinsic motivation is always more important than if you are forced and controlled onto something. So to summarize for Tiina, I think the key point in a case of a carve-out is to make sure that you keep your management team super motivated, So that in a sense, ideally, when the companies or the unit is sold off, they remain super motivated. But having said that, we don't know who is the purchaser. So then it's up to everyone's free agency to decide, free will, do I want to work for the new buyer? And you might not, you might. So in a sense, I think there's a question here also that there's an extent to which we can manage these things, and then every departure is a personal choice unless you're laid off, and people have the right to depart.
Yes, and it's exactly like you said, but kind of building that the carve-out unit, that type of culture that let's show that we are the best in whatever we do, and kind of bridging that to the future, that the better we perform and the better we do everything in this is basically impacting that what will be our future one way or another, whether it's a separate company. Sometimes it's like now, for example, Tietoevry has been going this strategic consideration for certain units that either they list it separately or they keep it or they sell it. And it has been going quite some time. But then if in the unit you create a culture that, yes, we will aim to be best in our business. So the end result, it links to the end result that whatever happens, it's probably the best choice for that unit and also for the people inside it. But it's not easy. But that's because sometimes these, like we have seen, that they last year or two or something, and it's a long period to live in uncertainty.
Yeah, definitely. That's only so much that we can take of that, and then it will cause other issues in the long run. Let's take another question, maybe one of our last ones or the last one before we need to close. We have 5 more minutes, so it depends how much we sit with this. It was one of the early ones that Minna posted. How would you measure the success of cultural integration in M&A? What early warning signs indicate that integration efforts might be failing? So what can you pick up on along the way to indicate to you clearly that, okay, this is not working according to the plan? We need to have one of those moments where we change the plan, we change direction, and we modify our approach so that actually we would find a common way to go forward. Satu.
Perhaps misunderstandings and frustrations in communications and interactions between employees of the two sides. Once you start to notice, it's normal at the start, there might be some, but if it continues and kind of people are just kind of really disappointed, that's a sign that in a sense you somehow need to do something about it. Another question, if you think about how to measure that, is what is the acquired staff's kind of commitment to the new buyer? At the moment they start to shift toward being committed, it might take a few months, it might take a few years. Cultural integration can take years, 5 to 12 years, and that's realistic. So when do they become committed? Some become on the first day, others take a long time. And then perhaps a third element is, in a sense, what is the progress of integration? Because if integration metrics start lacking, or you're lagging on your business goals, that actually means that there's something not just on integration management, but there's something cultural clash is taking place.
Yeah, and one in
so
that
performance, business performance is actually a signal that there's something going on the soft side.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to also continue your points with something that I have seen in many client cases where even though they're 1 or 2 years into this culture integration, they're one team, they still speak in terms of us and them. And they sometimes, very often actually, surprisingly often, they use the former company name. So that name is not really present at the business level or even as a brand anymore, but it's still used as the X team or Y team of the previous company. So when you notice that there's this us and them discourse, then that is a red flag that you should address. Why is there still this clear separation between the two entities?
Yeah. And it's business performance, retention, and then all this ear on the ground, that what you hear, like you said, examples, that what you hear and how people are feeling, and basically ask and listen, so that if it looks like the feedback is that people don't feel comfortable in the either side in this new setup, and there are issues raised and so forth, at least these need to be addressed, and maybe the integration completion will be delayed, so that you need to take additional steps, because in the end most of these still succeed in the long run, but if you compare to the initial business case, most of them fail. Actually, they don't meet the timeline or the financial outcome, and it's basically that things just don't happen as planned, and therefore it's very crucial to understand and listen and address the issues, which often are kind of practical or mental or based on lack of communication or misunderstanding, so that it's not huge things, but there might be multiple of these, so you need to address all these before you can go on and really complete the integration.
Exactly.
Thank you, Tuomo. I think to wrap up, I would say that it's interesting, like how we refer to these soft side, which often then is about the intangible aspects or elements in culture. But this, what you also said, we know time is money, and when we actually really drill into the so-called soft, which then of course we all start to understand are very much of the hard aspects of the business as well. When we dive into those in early stage, we actually win a lot of time. We can avoid a lot of assumptions taking place and so forth. So I think it's a good sort of thing what you said, Tuomo, that it at the same time things take time, but also we might avoid also from time consumption perspective losing time if we take these things seriously in the beginning or from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that even if we just reframe how we talk about these issues in other terms than the soft issues, thinking that actually dealing with people and nurturing these work relationships for common business goals is really difficult. It's not an easy or kind of fluffy, soft part of the business. It's what keeps leaders up every day, is often really not related to facts or numbers, but it is about really difficult relationships or difficult connection points to make. So really, thank you so much for this session. I hope that our audience also enjoyed the discussion. I'm happy that so many of you have written these comments and questions to us. If you have things that still come up, please don't hesitate to drop us a line. You will receive the report and the recording of this session tomorrow by email. And yeah, I would like to just close from my side with a huge thanks to our panelists and our participants and the interviewing leaders today. Thank you.
I join Alexandra in these thanks, and thank you all. And let's be in the vanguard of promoting this whole topic. It is very much of a topic that needs to be promoted and taken seriously. So thank you so much, Satu, and thank you so much, Tuomo, and thank you also, Alex, for leading the research and really putting together the report. Thank you.
I think on our side, I think Ia and Alex, super thank you for taking up this super important topic and kind of pushing it and driving it proactively. And thanks for having us. It's an important topic, so let's keep working on it. And let's recognize, as you said, it takes time. So none of us is perfect at it on the first go. I think it's a lifetime, and even then it will not be perfect, but we'll get better as we go.
Thank you, Satu.
Thank you.
Have a great autumn all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.